Hi, I'm Sana and I'll be sharing with you my favorite books I read in the last year, in 2019, which is always the video I look forward to filming the most. It feels like the biggest video of the year. Oh, and of course I'll be sharing how many books I read as well, with a reading goal of 100. But before we get started, I quickly wanted to ask you a question to put in the comments, because this year I really want to do a video where I read books recommended by you. I feel like by now a lot of you will have a good idea of what my taste is like. If you want to check out which books I have already read, I log it all on my GoodReads. But basically I would love for you to recommend one book specifically for me that you'd like me to read and talk about, ideally something that you think I'll like, and leave it in a comment below. First of all, I very quickly wanted to go to my GoodReads stats. How do I do that on my phone? Is that possible? My 2019 in books. So I read a total of 62 books. Usually every year I do the 50 book challenge. This year I wanted to do 100, and I was really happy I did, because it meant that I was just trying to read as much as I could, and I ended up at 62, which I'm actually very happy with. I read 14,431 pages. My shortest book was a Dutch picture book about dinosaurs, and my longest book was a Dracul with 608 pages. Now this is a stat I love. My most popular book that I read, so it's the book that the most people have read, that I've also read, was my reread of Twilight, which has been read by 4,816,471 people. And the book that I read this year that was the highest rated by everyone else was Becoming by Michelle Obama. I listened to the audiobook for that one. Okay, so let's get into my 10 favorite books. I pick these books based on how they made me feel, whether I want to reread them again, whether looking back the story really stuck with me, or if it's a book that I really would recommend to other people. So that's kind of how I make my decision. Also, I did my favorite books of the year so far video about 6 months back, and I haven't looked at that because I didn't want to be influenced by it. Okay, let's get into it. I don't really know what order to do this in, so I'm going to do a random order. I'm going to start with an audiobook that I actually also happen to have the physical book of, and it is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. I use my local library app to listen to the audiobook for free, and I just had such a great time. And for this book I would like to particularly recommend the audiobook. The narrator's voice, very sexy, and the book itself is also very exciting, very saucy, just like a great adventure of this young bisexual lord who is going on his grand tour, aka his gap year, which is a topic that when studying it at uni I was really intrigued by. So when I heard there was a YA book that covered that topic, I was like, I have to read this. Also in love with his best friend Percy. His sister comes along. I loved the speed of this. I loved all the things they got up to and how you get to see like little pieces of Europe. I think the story at the end gets a little bit wild, as in like the plot doesn't necessarily go the way that I thought it would go, and maybe doesn't make 100% sense, to me at least. But I absolutely loved this. There is a sequel as well that I'm going to listen to, but would really recommend this if you're up for a fun read. Then I'll quickly mention this, which I do remember was in my favorite books of the year so far video 6 months ago, and it is Lullaby, which is a book that's translated from French. It is a thriller, I would say. I don't read a lot of thrillers. Maybe a bit more of a literary thriller. It's quite a short book. It's about a young couple in Paris. Maybe their life isn't exactly how they want it to be, and they hire this nanny who comes highly recommended, and she seems like the perfect nanny, but then things start getting a bit odd, and you read part of it from her perspective, part of it from the couple, and it keeps switching, and it just, from the beginning you know it's going to be a dark story because the subtitle is "The baby is dead. It only took a few seconds." Just the way that the nanny's life was described and her personality was described, and the viciousness of how people react to each other really stuck with me. You might have seen this coming a little bit, but I think this might be one of the first times that I have two books by the same author on my top 10 list, and it is Cersei and the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I feel like by now you've probably heard many people mention the plot. This is a story of a young nymph who meddles in things she shouldn't meddle with, and she gets banished, grows up, you know, for thousands and thousands of years by herself, and it's about how her character develops and how she learns and how she reacts to certain things that happen to her, bad and good, and kind of tells a different angle of Greek myth. Same for this. The Song of Achilles is the story of Achilles and Patroclus and how they grow up, and this is definitely a tragic love story. I hosted a book club for this book. I just loved the writing style of both of these. I devoured them. I cried a lot while reading this. Loved these and couldn't not put both of them on the list. Then there's one that I listened to the audiobook as well. I do not have a physical copy, and it is This Is Going to Hurt, which is the memoir of Adam Kay, who worked in a hospital, and they're almost like a series of tweets and a series of anecdotes, and he looks back at his time working there and the people he helped and the people who died and the people who came in with like hilarious stories, and it's such a roller coaster ride. It's really funny, but also gives you an insight of what goes on behind the scenes at a hospital. Again, would highly recommend. I think it's also a really great book to give to people who maybe don't read a ton, because I think it will really draw people in. Definitely not my usual kind of read, but really horrifying and heartwarming and disgusting and lovely at the same time. Then I have some poetry. Jen Campbell's The Girl Aquarium. Jen is also a good friend and fellow booktuber, and I was really excited to read her poetry bundle this year, and I really, really loved it. I've heard her perform several of the poems live and on video, and it's all about girls and bodies and nature and beauty and fairy tales, darkness, and there's love and friendship. I loved the themes running through it and how you were able to connect the different poems together to kind of like weave this story, which I know is always very personal when it comes to poetry, but yeah, I really loved this. Then one of the last books I read in 2019, when I read the first few pages of it, I immediately went, this is going to be a top of the year kind of book. So I really wanted to finish it before the end of the year, and it is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I had this on my list for a while, and then when I was doing my reading week, I just finished a book. I was at Waterstones and then picked this up and just raced through it. It's about a black woman in the 1970s who suddenly gets pulled back into history, like time travel basically, to save this little boy who will then grow up to be a slave owner, and she keeps coming back to what is her present and then being pulled back in like very quick succession, but she's actually jumping through the years in the past. It's about her adapting to life and experiencing this period and being horrified by it, but also recognizing things she's heard before, trying to figure out if she can change this boy and then man and what her relationship with him is. It's super engaging. It's a really quick read, but it has so much depth to it as well. Like, you really get to know these characters on a deep level. I'm so glad I've read it, and I definitely want to read more by this author. I think it was written in the 70s, so really interesting to read in 2019, where you almost have like 3 time jumps as you're reading it. The last 3 are all YA. The Truth About Keeping Secrets by Savannah Brown. Again, it was a favorite early on in the year. It's the story of a teenage girl whose father passes away in a car crash, but she feels like something else might have happened. About her also making this kind of like unlikely connection with another girl and dealing with grief. It's just beautifully written, and actually I'm really keen to reread this. Then there is The Deathless Girls. I got to work on the campaign for this book with the publisher, which I was so happy about, because Kieran Millwood Hargrave's books, so far what I've read, I've loved, and every time she picks a topic, I'm like, yes, that is a topic I love. And in this case, this gorgeous, I mean, it has to be mentioned, this book is beautiful. This is the story of 2 girls. They're twin sisters. They are from a traveler community, and they get kidnapped and their family gets murdered. They get taken to this castle. Then they hear about this man called the Dragon, who may or may not be Count Dracula, which I don't think is a spoiler, because this is kind of a Dracula origin story, but not of Dracula himself. The descriptions in this are so luscious, and again, like, you feel like you're really there. I feel like the cover really encapsulates the writing as well. The setting of the kind of medieval castle and working in the kitchens, like, that is something that I'm an absolute sucker for, so really love this. And then finally, maybe a bit of an unexpected one. This is actually for a video where I did like try a chapter of 10 books and then decide which ones I want to keep reading, which ones I want to get rid of. And this is one of the ones I kept reading, so, you know, I'll refer back to that when I upload that video. This is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. I thought this was going to be slightly more fantasy and slightly more historical from the cover purely, but this is a book kind of set, I guess, in a dystopian society where people don't die anymore because technology has advanced, which means that it gets a little bit boring and people don't care as much about life anymore, so they have these people whose job it is to be a scythe, and they can glean people, aka kill them, basically. But they can't do it in any sort of biased way. People fear them, people give them as much as they can because they want to be on their good side. And it's about two teenagers who get chosen to become a Scythe. The only way you can become a Scythe is to not want to be a Scythe. I think my highlights for this book were definitely that I was just obsessed with the world it was set in. It was so interesting as a thought experiment to think about what life would be like. And this has so many twists and turns. Like, every time I thought I knew where the story was going, it went a totally different way, and I loved that. And it's the first in a series of 3. I've already reserved number 2 from the library, so really looking forward to reading more of that. Okay, so that is it for my top 10 of the year. I always wonder if these are like a big surprise when you watch it, or if you think that it was really obvious and you knew that was going to be my top 10. But I would love to hear what your favorite books were that you read. If you've made your own video like this, please link it below as well, as I'd love to watch those. I'm really excited for a new reading year, and next up I will be posting a look back at my resolutions from 2019 and my new resolutions for 2020. So I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Doei!